Hi everyone, my name is Marco from Berdine's Jewelry, and today I have the incredible good fortune of having a good friend, Berdine's client, and a veteran of the watch YouTube space. Greg, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, starting off, I guess for those who want to or who have seen maybe your video with Teddy Baldassar, Revolution Watch, where can they kind of see your stuff?
Greg Watchman is my Instagram. I don't really do anything on YouTube except for getting interviewed a few times. But just Greg Watchman is my Instagram. I'm just very passionate about watches and watch collecting.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to take kind of a different approach. I had a chance to obviously see the interviews with Revolution and with Teddy, amazing videos. And also you just recently did an interview talking watches and guns as well, which is for all those who are passionate. We'll put all the links down in the description. So
yeah, that was fun.
Check those out. That was a great video. So yeah, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit different things in terms of how you got into watches first and foremost. And like, was there like a watch or, a memory, a story that kind of really sparked your interest in the hobby?
Well, I think, growing up, I was born in the 70s and, you would see gentlemen would be wearing watches. And what I mean by that is like your father, your uncle, brothers, mentors. You would always see a man with a watch. I mean, women wore watches too. But as a young man growing up, that's one of the things that I saw and I aspired to. And I'd see a gentleman wearing a watch. My father wore a watch, my uncles. And I'm like, I thought that's something that a gentleman would have. So I was always interested in it. And I remember getting, like, the first watch I ever got was a G-Shock. And I thought it was one of the coolest watches in the world because it, I think it actually had a few different, functions in terms of chronograph and chronograph and maybe even a countdown
alarm, world
alarm, yeah, things like that. But this was early; they didn't even have the world timers and that. And but it was also something that you'd see in movies. You would see action heroes wearing a watch. So as a young man, I was aspiring to do cool things like that and watching those movies and. So I was like, you had to have a good watch. But at the time, again, it was like a G-Shock. So that's how it kind of started. And as I grew up, grew older, one of the other watches that I really got into was Citizen. And then I had a world timer once I started getting into Citizen watches. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I guess kind of looking out now, does that still kind of play a big influence, or what are kind of the aspects that you look for whenever you're considering adding a watch to your collection?
Well, honestly, for me, it just has to speak to me, and it could speak to me in different ways. Sometimes people buy a watch to emulate something that they want to be, or maybe they, are passionate about, or something like dive watches, for example, right? I'm not a diver, but do I have dive watches? Yeah, why? Because they're cool. But I don't dive. And, so it just depends. Aviation watches, for example. I'm passionate about aviation and learning about how watches were a part of aviation and the history of aviation. I mean, from Breitling, for example, making the clocks inside and the instruments, I think even other instruments.
Yeah, and using the slide tool to measure.
Well, and then Breitling came out with a slide rule on a wristwatch, and they were the first to do that, and that's something that, again, is tied to that history. And that
there's so much, right? Brigade Type 20 with the French.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
right.
So
100%. I just think of Breitling in terms of the slide rule, but yes, Brigade, absolutely the Type 20.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have that history. Dive watches from, a Submariner to Long Pond, 50 Fathoms.
Well, even Tudor holds its own way with the
100%, and tying that to different military units and things. So I think part of the history of each piece or brand is also something that's important to me when I'm looking at watch collecting.
Yeah, totally. I think it's kind of a mix, right? And most people would say it's a mix of like the story, the history, but also the aesthetics, right?
100%.
The watch has this, when you see the watch and hold the watch in person, and I always recommend, seeing the watch and trying it out because it's the most important thing by a mile. You get that sensation, that warm, fuzzy feeling, if you will, like I got to own.
And that's what's so cool about watch collecting, for example, and the people in the community. When you start to get involved in the community, one of the things I do is I help run the Red Bar Chicago chapter, and Red Bar is a collectors group. It's an international collectors group, and I help run the Chicago chapter. And I've met so many collectors from everything from a G-Shock to a Journe, and you've got people that, you know, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how high-end the watch is or whatever. It's people can show you, share with you, and you're able to see in the metal, like, oh, I've never seen this. Well, hey, I've got one. You know, I'll bring it to the next get-together, and you're like, holy cow, I've never seen anything like this. So it's really cool.
Yeah, that's the most rewarding part, right? We were discussing a little off camera, right? The watches are like kind of material objects, but it's the friendships, the connections, and the people you meet.
1,000%.
You know, I've been fortunate enough. I have like a group on YouTube. If you're familiar with the JJ's Watch Hangout, it's like we're just like a huge group of guys that like come together, you know, Fridays, Sundays, and like that kind of thing, and just talk. And you know, yeah, we're just a collector community, same kind of mindsets, and we just enjoy kind of the time and companionship, if you will, more than the actual watches themselves sometimes.
No, I think it winds up being that way. You connect it initially because someone has a watch you might be interested in, or they're interested in yours or something, and then you start connecting, but then you build these friendships. And the friendships that I have within the watch community, I mean, it's priceless. That to me is more important than any of the other stuff. It really is, because I found over the years, when we're getting together for these events, I'm looking less at watches and talking more about, you know, their families and their lives and what's going on. So it's really cool. It really is.
Absolutely. I guess zoning in a little bit on the watches themselves, right? Are there any brands or watchmakers particularly that speak to, and what is it about them?
Well, I mean, going back to what you were discussing about history. History is very important to me in looking at some of the brands. So going back to, you know, you think about some of the big three, as they call them, or the Holy Grail, Patek, Audemars, and Vacheron Constantin. The history with those brands and how they made a mark in the industry, you know, going back to Gerald Genta's designs and things like that, and how they were tied into the Nautilus, into the Royal Oak. That is interesting to me, very interesting. I really, like Patek, for example, love the history. Don't own one yet, someday. But Patek, for me, was actually started by two Polish people when it was Patek and Che. And I have a history. My parents are from Poland. They're immigrants. So I have a rich history with that. So that's kind of interesting to me. Vacheron being one of the oldest continuously run watchmakers, because we know during the war, World War II specifically, a lot of manufacturers shut down.
Sure.
Vacheron was still running.
Okay.
So they kind of have that mark. That sort of history is interesting to me. Recently, I was in Poland and had a chance to go to Switzerland, and I was able to tour a few manufacturers. One was Fortis watches, and it was great to be able to see them and hang out, tour their manufacturing. They're a smaller, independent brand, great brand. Been wearing one of their watches for over 17 plus years. They're known for making the cosmonaut chronograph, which is what was issued to the Russian cosmonauts. But I also had a great opportunity to see Panerai, and that was one of the most amazing experiences I had. We were able to tour the manufacturer, we meaning me and my children. We went there and had this amazing tour to see how they develop the watches, how they test the watches, all the manufacturing, even did a watchmaker's class.
That's got to be priceless.
Oh my gosh, no, it was 1,000% priceless.
Yeah.
That, the people at Panerai are absolutely amazing people.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, like, what, you know, when you're in the kind of pre-owned space, it's awesome. You get great deals and that kind of stuff, but you lack kind of the human connection, right? Yes. And that's one thing that I tell people is like physically to go in and meet these brands and these people behind them, because you meet so many like-minded, passionate people
100%.
Who are like, not just out there for your best interest, but will show you the best time.
Oh, 1,000%. And I think that client relationship also drives people to have more interest in those brands when you know you have that sort of a connection. Because the people in the collecting community are passionate.
Sure.
We're all passionate about these overly priced mechanical devices that none of us need, but we absolutely love and appreciate. And when you have a connection with a brand, a boutique like here at Berdine's, Having that sort of connection is extremely important, and I think that also fuels our passion and love for watches and watch collecting.
Yeah, definitely. I guess being a seasoned collector, do you have any kind of collecting regrets, or what would you kind of recommend to maybe somebody, maybe not so new, but like maybe wants to broaden their horizons in the world of watches?
First of all, to get into collecting, you don't have to have the most expensive watch. You really don't, okay? I mean, you can get into it with a G-Shock, with a Seiko. You're talking hundreds of dollars as opposed to hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And in some cases with Casio well under $100.
100%. And, but the thing is, it's like you can get into it and even just be in that space and still be extremely happy. To me, it's not about the value, okay? When I buy a piece, I'm not like, oh, that'll be worth X amount someday or whatever. I don't care. I really don't care. If it speaks to me, if there's something about the watch that is going to make me feel better about, just having a spot in my heart going, man, when I put this on, this is how I feel. Just like wearing a nice suit for a gentleman. When you throw on a nice suit, you go to an interview, go to an event, or something like that, you feel a little bit better about yourself, right? Because you're putting your best foot forward. And I think it's the same thing with a watch, is wearing a nice watch that you might be passionate about or something, and throwing that on, I think is helpful. So again, I'm not in the space of flipping. I've never sold any of my watches. Not one. It's crossed my mind, but each one speaks to me in a different way. And I know some of my friends, other collectors, are like, man, if you flip this and that and blah, 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 then you can buy this Grail or this, that. And I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, those memories are then lost in that watch, right? Even, like looking at it myself, I look at things sometimes too objectively, right? It's like, I'm so nitpicky. Oh, well, if I did this, I can get that. And it's just like, well, no, because the thing is the memories are attached to that watch. And listen, I have big time regrets. I've traded in and out of watches. You wouldn't even imagine over the but it's part of being in the business, right?
100%.
Access to product and great deals and all that kind of stuff. So listen, there's so many like aspects I would change, but I tell people all the time, maybe just like slow down and enjoy the process and the journey, and listen, the memories will come along with the watches.
100%. And some of my friends that are collectors, they enjoy having it for a little while and going, I want something different. I get that. And then some people are like, well, how much wrist time does that watch actually get? And I'm like, well, I actually, almost every single day, I'm wearing a different watch. And what's as nerdy as I am, I will go back through my Instagram and see what I wore the last time or the strap combination on that watch and go, nope, I need to change it for this time. It's geeky, it's nerdy, but that's part of it for me. But each of my watches get wrist time. Even if one hasn't got as much as another, I still look at it. I might have a memory tied to that piece and go, oh, man, I feel like throwing it on today. So that, to me, is what's important. It's really the memory and the passion of why you're buying it. If you're buying it just for money to flip or something like that, that's not in my world.
It becomes a little soulless for sure.
I think so. But I get why some people do it. I mean, it can be a business. There's no question about it.
No question.
That's just not my collecting journey.
For sure. I guess looking forward, is there anything that you'd like to see from certain brands, or any new releases that you'd like to see out there in the watch industry, or things, trends that people that you'd like to see kind of grow into the industry?
Wow. I mean, I think a lot of brands are changing with the tide of collecting now. I truly believe that. And I think it's because the collecting community has grown so much over the last 10 years at least, I think, probably a little bit more. Take, for example, sometimes people call it the Houdinki effect. When Houdinki first started,
Sure.
Especially with them talking about vintage pieces and things like that, you saw an upsurge of people really getting into vintage, which is great. I've never owned a vintage piece. It's not really my thing. I think about it now and then, but because it's grown so much, there's all different kinds of ways that people can get into it. And I think in terms of like how the brands have changed, for example, we'll go back to Breitling, for example. I love Breitling. I own several pieces from them. when George Kearns took over, a lot of people were a little taken back by it. I was even too. They got rid of the Wing B, for example, and they went back to the other one. And some people were like, well, no, that's not. Well, actually, the original was the previous.
Sure.
And what he's done with the brand, bringing back some of the history and paying homage to some of those pieces with the newer stuff, I think it's been great.
Absolutely.
And they're doing extremely well. Panerai, for example. People were getting angry with Panerai because they started making smaller watches. Oh, well, that's not. But you know what? You're getting more people into the brand.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, you know, as we know, I mean, we have friends that are collectors that might have a smaller wrist, and they're like, I would love a Panerai.
47, just
44, 47. I'm not rocking it. It is too big. So I think that's a good thing. Vacheron, we were talking about earlier. They've changed, like even on the piece you're wearing here. Which one is this again?
It's a 56.
This is the 56. And the bracelet's completely different from what they've ever done before, but it looks absolutely stunning. They still have the Maltese cross on the back, which I love, and I think that still plays into their history. So yeah, I think really there's nothing that I'm like, oh, I have to have this or have to have that. But I will say, one of the things I've learned, for example, when Rolex came out with the new version of the Submariner, the 41 millimeter, right? People were going nuts, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, it was like 1 millimeter bigger," and they changed the clasp and the bracelet. Now the movement was changed. Okay, I get that, but then I'm like, really, is it that big of a deal?
Right.
And one of our collectors, we were doing Zooms at the time because it was during the pandemic, and I only had one Rolex before, and that was my that was my Explorer 2. And I said, that's the only Rolex I'm ever going to have. I don't need anything else. He let me borrow his for a few weeks. I was like, I fell in love, and I'm like, okay, I got to get this. But here's the thing: you look at that watch. It hasn't changed much since what, 1955?
Pretty much, yeah. So all you can really say is material upgrades, right? Changing steel, changing the bezel material, the loom.
But overall, it looks...
Design aesthetic is the same.
100%. But there's a reason for it, and there's a reason why it's as popular as it is, and it wears as well as it does. So I'm like, okay, I get that. So they don't even change that much. I mean, they're not into major... complications, for example. Like, I mean, the one, what is it called?
The Skydweller.
The Skydweller. Awesome. I mean, tons of patents on that. That's a really unique thing, but they're not really known for that.
Right.
Then you look at some of the other brands, like you were talking about earlier, Breguet, Blancpain, Journe. I mean, you want to talk about some crazy complications, and you get into some other worlds there.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm totally with you. I always say my favorite, collection of any brand is Vacheron Constantin with the historique slide, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because you think about like modern watches, like our favorite or most people's favorite is like historical re-editions of old watches.
It is. So, and that's where I think it's great that some of the brands have shifted into going back to looking at their catalog from a long time ago and going, hey, you know what? It's not necessarily a re-edition, but maybe a new spin, and then still has that flavor. And I think that's awesome.
Awesome. Well, Greg, I really appreciate you joining. It was great to have you.
Yeah.
Hopefully we could do this again sometime soon.
Yeah.
Guys, if you want to follow Greg, I'll leave the link down to his Instagram in the description below. Please be sure to, of course, like the video, subscribe for more in the future. Greg, thanks so much for joining me again. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Take care. Thanks.